called my wife at 1 mile in the morning from a hotel room in Chicago, and my best friend answered her phone. Not her, him. She's a little busy right now, Danny said, cool as you please, like he was covering for a coworker who stepped away from her desk. She'll call you back. And then I heard her laugh. That specific laugh. The real one, the one that goes all the way up to her eyes, coming through the phone from somewhere behind him. I took one slow breath, stared at the water stain on the hotel ceiling, and said the only thing that made any sense. Keep her, man. She's your problem now. The silence on the other end was the most beautiful thing I'd heard in months. I'm going to be straight with you. I'm not some guy who saw the signs and chose to look away. I wasn't stoically enduring a bad marriage while secretly cataloging evidence. I was genuinely, embarrassingly clueless, the kind of oblivious that makes you wonder if there's a medical term for it. My name is Kurt Dellinger. I'm 53 years old. I manage a regional HVAC distribution company out of Columbus, Ohio. And until about a month ago, I thought my life was in pretty decent shape. I had a routine that ran like a well-maintained furnace. Up at 6, coffee strong enough to strip paint, sit at the kitchen table, and listen to the morning news while my wife, Patty, got ready for work. We'd been married 11 years. We had a house with a mortgage we were slowly winning against, a dog named Biscuit who was mostly useless, but deeply lovable, and what I genuinely believed was a solid, if unexciting, marriage. Patty worked in marketing for a regional hospital network. She was good at her job, ambitious in that quiet way that sneaks up on you, and she had this whole professional persona she'd been building over the last few years. LinkedIn posts about leadership, after-work events she called brand building, a wardrobe that had shifted from practical to expensive somewhere around year 9 of our marriage. I thought it was just career stuff. People evolve. I was proud of her, actually. Our best friend was a guy named Danny Pruitt. I say our best friend because that's genuinely how it felt. He was equally comfortable calling Patty to chat as he was calling me to complain about the Browns. We'd known each other since we were both 22, working the same warehouse job while we figured out what we wanted to be when we grew up. He'd been the best man at our wedding. He had a key to our house. He came over for dinner at least twice a week, sometimes more. He was just Danny. Reliable, funny, always around, always welcome. I know. Looking back now, the signs were sitting right there on the kitchen counter, like mail I'd chosen not to open. The way Patty's whole energy changed when Danny walked into a room, lighter, more animated, laughing at things that weren't that funny. The inside jokes I wasn't inside of. The way she'd started volunteering Danny for household projects, I was perfectly capable of handling myself. Don't bother Kurt, he's swamped with work. Danny said he'd look at the water heater. Yeah, he was looking at more than the water heater, but I'll get to that. I paid the bills. I fixed what broke. I asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. I thought that was what a good husband looked like. Turns out, I'd confused being dependable with being present, and those are not the same thing. But here's the deal. Even if I'd been failing as a husband in some ways, which maybe I had, that's a conversation you have. That's a thing you work on. It's not a thing you outsource to the guy who knows your Netflix password. The conference was in Chicago. 3 days of supply chain seminars and networking events in a hotel that smelled like carpet cleaner and broken ambition. I'd been to a dozen of these things. They were exactly as exciting as they sound, which is to say, not at all. But the company paid for it, and sometimes getting out of Columbus for a few days does something good for your head, even if the content is mind-numbing. I'd texted Patty twice that evening. First time, just checking in. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji. Second time, I asked if she wanted me to bring her anything from the airport gift shop on the way home. She likes those overpriced chocolate-covered pretzels. And she didn't respond at all. I told myself she was probably tired, busy. She had a big campaign launching that week, lots of moving parts. I was good at telling myself reasonable things. By midnight, I was lying in that hotel bed in the dark, one of those insomniac, half-awake states where you're too tired to do anything but too wired to actually sleep. And I got hit with this wave of, I don't know what to call it. Loneliness, maybe. The real kind, not just being alone in a room, but the feeling that you're alone in a life that's supposed to have two people in it. So I called her, just to hear her voice, just to say goodnight. The phone rang twice. Danny answered. She's a little busy right now. She'll call you back. I want to tell you, I immediately said something devastating and hung up. But the truth is, I sat there for about 4 seconds with my mouth open, my brain trying to generate a reasonable explanation. Maybe she left her phone at his place. Maybe they were all hanging out as a group. Maybe this was some kind of weird coincidence with a perfectly logical. And then I heard her laugh. Not a polite laugh. Not a social laugh. The real one. The one I used to make her do back when things were good between us and hadn't heard in probably 2 years. 4 seconds of attempting to be charitable. That's all I had in me. Keep her, man. She's your problem now. I hung up, turned my phone off, and slept like I hadn't slept in months. I genuinely don't know how to explain the calm that came over me. I'd expected to feel like the floor had dropped out from under me. Instead, I felt something closer to clarity, like a diagnosis you were dreading, that turns out to explain every symptom you'd been ignoring for years. Oh, that's what this was. That's why everything felt slightly wrong. Now I know. In the morning, I turned my phone back on. 41 missed calls, 14 from Danny, 26 from Patty, and 1 from my mother, which meant the panic had already started spreading through channels I didn't control. I turned the phone back off and went down to the hotel breakfast. The woman running the buffet, her name tag said Gloria, raised one eyebrow at my plate, which I'll admit was excessive. Eggs, bacon, sausage, hash browns, a waffle, a cinnamon roll the size of a softball. "You doing okay, hun?" she asked. "Better than I was 6 hours ago," I said honestly. She patted my arm like she'd heard stranger answers and moved on. I ate every bite, ordered coffee that could have stripped the finish off a hardwood floor, sat in the corner of that sad beige dining room and thought through what I was going to do, not what I was going to feel. I'd deal with feelings later, but what I was going to do. I turned my phone back on around 8:30. Patty's first text said, "Sorry, phone died, LOL." I stared at that for a full minute. Phone died, LOL. 11 years of marriage. Her husband calls from a hotel room at 1 in the morning and gets Danny's voice on the line, and her opening move is, "Phone died, LOL." No punctuation. Lowercase. Like she was explaining why she missed a dentist appointment. I typed back, "No worries. Hope the service was nice." She responded in under 30 seconds. "What?" Then, "Kurt, can we talk? I know how that looked, but it's not." Then, "Please call me." Then, "It's not what you think." I put the phone in my pocket and finished my cinnamon roll. The texts kept coming, little buzzes against my hip, each one probably more desperate than the last. I didn't read them. I was thinking about logistics, which is, after all, what I do for a living. I think in systems, I think in sequences. I think about which lever, pulled in which order, produces the intended outcome. By the time I boarded my flight home, I had the beginning of a plan. The house was empty when I got back Thursday afternoon. Patty was at work, which was exactly what I needed. I dropped my suitcase in the bedroom and started walking through our house with completely different eyes. Not the eyes of a man who lived there, but the eyes of someone conducting an audit. Biscuit followed me from room to room, tail going, thrilled to have someone home. I scratched his ears. "You knew, didn't you?" He licked my hand. Probably not, but I appreciated the solidarity. I started in Patty's home office, which was the second bedroom converted into a workspace. A real desk, a good chair, a corkboard covered in project timelines and marketing briefs. She was organized about her work. I'd always respected that about her. Her planner was sitting right there. I felt a flicker of guilt, then remembered Danny's voice on the phone and the flicker went out. Color-coded calendar, blue for work, green for personal, yellow for what she'd labeled book club. Yellow every Thursday evening for the past 5 months. Some Saturdays too. I took pictures of every page. Then I checked her Instagram, because Patty documented everything. It was practically a professional obligation. She was constantly posting content, calling it building her personal brand. I scrolled back through the past 5 months of Thursday evenings and cross-referenced. Thursday, 3 months ago. Photo of a craft beer. Caption, needed this after a long week. Location tagged at a sports bar I'd never been to. Thursday, 6 weeks ago. Photo of a fire pit at night. Tagged with Danny and 4 other people. Caption, best people, best night. Danny's apartment was in the background of 2 other photos. His specific couch, I'd helped him move that couch up 3 flights of stairs, visible behind Patty's shoulder while she smiled at the camera. I took screenshots of everything. Then I found the receipts. Patty kept a folder of them for tax purposes. She was meticulous about it, which was, in retrospect, both her most organized quality and her most incriminating mistake. I went through month by month. Dinner for 2 at Luciano's, the good Italian place downtown, $94. On a Tuesday when she told me she had a late client call. A hotel stay at the Riverside Inn, $175. On a Saturday she'd supposedly spent at a women's leadership conference in Cleveland. Victoria's Secret, 3 separate purchases over 4 months. I hadn't seen any of it. And then my personal favorite, a receipt from an outdoor equipment store for a tent, sleeping bags, and a camp stove. Total, $318. Patty hated camping. I mean, genuinely hated it. I took her once, early in our marriage, and she lasted 5 hours before she started Googling nearby hotels on her phone. She called nature an aggressive inconvenience. She once described a hiking trail as a walking punishment. But apparently she'd overcome her deep philosophical objection to the outdoors when Danny suggested a weekend at his family's lake property. I sat on the floor of her office, surrounded by receipts and photographs and calendar pages, and I laughed. Not a happy laugh. More like the sound a pressure valve makes when it finally releases. She'd kept every receipt. Neat little folder labeled 2024 expenses. Sitting right there on her desk like a gift. I photographed everything. Created a folder on my laptop, labeled it personal documents, and started building my understanding of exactly what had been happening in my house while I was moving HVAC units from point A to point B. I heard keys in the front door. I moved fast, closed the planner, restacked the receipts, got myself onto the couch with my laptop open to something innocuous. When Patty walked in, I was the picture of a man who'd just gotten home from a boring work trip and was catching up on emails. "Hey," she said. Her voice was careful, controlled. She'd had the drive home to prepare. "Hey," I looked up and smiled. "Good week?" She relaxed about 15%. Not all the way, she was too smart for that, but enough. Busy, you know how it is. "How was Chicago?" "Exactly as exciting as it sounds. How was book club?" A micro pause, a fraction of a second where her eyes went somewhere else and came back. "Good. We're reading a memoir. Woman who travels across the country trying to find herself." "Sounds interesting. What's her name, the author?" Another pause, slightly longer. "I don't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up." "No worries," I said, and turned back to my laptop. She stood in the living room for a moment, watching me, trying to read me. I gave her nothing, just a man looking at his screen, relaxed, unbothered. After a beat, she went upstairs to change. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close, then exhaled slowly. Game on. The next few days were genuinely strange. Patty was doing this thing where she was trying to be the wife she should have been for the past year. Attentive, warm, making actual meals instead of reheating things, asking about my day with what looked like real interest. It had the quality of a performance she hadn't quite rehearsed enough for. The lines were right, but the timing was off. Sunday morning, she made pancakes from scratch. Actual pancakes, not frozen ones, which was notable because Patty's cooking peaked at assembling a charcuterie board. She came into the kitchen in her old college sweatshirt and fuzzy socks, looking deliberately cozy and domestic, and slid a plate in front of me with a smile that was working too hard. "Missed you this week?" she said. "Yeah," I said, cutting into the pancake. "The hotel mattress was terrible." She laughed, and that uncertain laugh people make when they're not sure if you're being funny or being pointed. I didn't laugh back, just ate the pancake, which was actually pretty good, and scrolled through my phone. "You seem quiet," she observed. "I'm always quiet in the morning." "Different kind of quiet." I looked up at her. "How so?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at her coffee cup. "I don't know. Never mind." Danny texted me that afternoon. Hey man, you good? Haven't heard from you. I read it 3 times. The audacity was almost impressive in its own way. The sheer confidence required to send a casual, you good text to the man whose wife you've been sleeping with. Like nothing happened, like we were still just 2 guys who watched football together and complained about their mortgages. I typed back, all good. Been slammed with work stuff. Short, normal. Nothing he could work with? Let him wonder. Let him try to figure out what I knew and what I didn't. The uncertainty would be doing more work than anything I could say directly. That night I sat at the kitchen table, after Patty went to bed, and opened a new document on my laptop. I thought about what I actually had available to me. Not drama, not confrontation. Not the kind of explosion that makes you feel better for 20 minutes and worse for 20 years. What I had was information, professional knowledge, industry connections, and a very clear understanding of how systems work and where they're vulnerable. Danny ran his own small real estate investment operation. Nothing huge. He bought properties, fixed them up, or rented them out, sold them when the market was right. He'd been doing it for about 6 years, and he was good at it. Or at least he'd been good at it until he apparently started devoting significant mental energy to destroying my marriage instead of doing his due diligence. A few months back, he'd been bragging about a lake cabin he'd purchased as an investment property. Showed me the listing, asked my opinion on the value, even joked that we should all go up there for a weekend. I'd been genuinely happy for him. I'd even suggested a few contractors he could use for the renovation. I pulled up the county property records, all public, all legal, and searched his name. One lake cabin, purchased 8 months ago for $262,000. I started digging through the transaction details, the LLC he'd set up to hold the property, the registration paperwork. And there it was, the kind of thing you'd only notice if you knew what you were looking at. The LLC was registered in the wrong state for the property's location, which created a tax reporting problem that could range from an honest mistake to a serious compliance violation, depending on what else was in his paperwork. I wasn't going to fabricate anything. I wasn't going to file false reports or manufacture problems that didn't exist. What I was going to do was make sure that the problems that did exist found their way to the right sets of eyes. I saved everything, closed the laptop, and went to bed. Monday morning, I got to the office early. My colleague, Renee Calloway, was already there, which was typical. Renee was one of those people who arrived before anyone else, not because she had to, but because she genuinely liked having the place to herself for the first hour. She handled contracts and legal compliance for our firm, and she had this quality of seeing through situations to their structural core that made her simultaneously excellent at her job and slightly terrifying in casual conversation. She appeared in my doorway around 9 with 2 coffees and the expression of someone who already knew something was wrong. You look like a man who either didn't sleep or made a major decision, she said, coming in and putting one of the cups on my desk. Which is it? Both, probably. She sat down across from me without being invited, because that's what Renee did. Talk. So I talked. I told her everything. The Chicago call, Danny's voice, Patty's laugh, the receipts, the planner, the property records. I laid it all out while Renee sat across from me with her coffee, listening without interrupting, which was unusual enough that I knew she was taking it seriously. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. 6 months, she said. What? I've known something was off between Patty and Danny for about 6 months. The way they acted at the company Christmas party last year, it wasn't obvious, but it wasn't nothing either. She looked at me steadily. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place and I wasn't certain. I'm sorry I didn't say something. I processed that. I'm not sure it would have changed anything. Probably not. But still. She picked up her coffee. Okay, what are you thinking? I'm thinking Danny has some real compliance problems with his property LLC that he probably doesn't know anyone's noticed yet. Renee's expression shifted into something I could only describe as professionally interested. What kind of problems? I showed her the records on my screen. She leaned forward, scanning the documents, and after about 90 seconds, she made a low sound in her throat. Oh, Danny, she said almost gently. This is a mess. He's got the LLC registered in Ohio, but the property's in Indiana. Depending on how he's been filing his taxes, he could owe back taxes to Indiana, Ohio, or possibly both. And if he's been deducting expenses incorrectly, she looked up at me. This isn't a technicality. This is a genuine compliance problem that any state revenue department would be interested in. Would it be appropriate for someone to bring it to their attention? It would be a civic responsibility, Renee said, and I do compliance reviews as part of my actual job. If I happen to be reviewing public records in the course of my work and noticed potential irregularities, it would be professionally irresponsible not to flag them. She paused. To the appropriate state agencies. Anonymously? Well, in an official capacity. My name would be on the letter, but it would be a professional correspondence, not a personal vendetta. She tilted her head. There's a difference. I know. Good. She stood up. I'll also need to think about the Peterson Group. What about them? Danny's been trying to close a deal with them for months. Major investment partnership. I've heard him mention it at least 4 times. The Peterson Group does extremely thorough due diligence on everyone they work with. They dropped a developer last year over a pattern of minor legal oversights. They called it incompatible professional standards. Renee smoothed her jacket. If someone were to make sure they had complete information about Danny's compliance situation before that deal closed, they'd probably want to know. You have a contact there? I have contacts everywhere. It's what happens when you've been doing this for 22 years, and you actually return people's phone calls. She moved toward the door. Forward me the property documents, just the public records. I'll take it from there. She was almost out the door when she paused and turned back. Kurt, one question. Yeah. Is this about hurting them, or is this about making sure the truth catches up with people who made a lot of bad choices and were counting on no one noticing? I thought about it, honestly. Both, I said. But mostly the second one. She nodded. Good. That's the version I can help with. After she left, I sat at my desk and looked at the framed photo of Patty and me from our 10th anniversary trip to Asheville. Both of us smiling, arms around each other, mountain air, good wine, a weekend where things had felt genuinely good between us. I turned it face down on the desk. Then I opened my email and started writing to a few industry contacts. Friendly check-ins, casual professional correspondence, nothing that could be traced to anything but normal networking. Hey, heard you're working with Danny Pruitt on the Riverside project. He's been talking about the Peterson Group partnership. Those guys are serious about due diligence, right? Hope everything's buttoned up on his end? Not a lie, not an accusation. Just a question with an implication built into it. The kind that makes people start looking more carefully at things they'd previously accepted at face value. By Wednesday, Renee had sent her letter to the relevant state revenue department. She'd also had what she described as a routine professional conversation with her contact at the Peterson Group, during which she'd mentioned in passing that she'd noticed some interesting compliance questions in a public property record involving one of their prospective partners. Thursday morning, my phone rang. It was a developer named Phil Garrett, who I'd worked with on a couple of projects and who I knew had a deal in progress with Danny. Kurt, quick question. You still close with Danny Pruitt? We've known each other a long time, I said carefully. I'm hearing some stuff about compliance issues with one of his properties. Tax problems, maybe some LLC registration irregularities. My lawyer says it could be significant. Phil paused. I've got $250,000 committed to a joint project with him. Should I be worried? Phil, I'm not in a position to comment on Danny's business specifically. But if your lawyer has concerns, I'd take that seriously before you commit anything else. I kept my voice neutral, friendly. Better to ask the questions now than after the check clears. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Another pause. Is everything okay with you two? We've been less in touch lately, I said. Different projects, different directions, you know how it goes. Got it. Phil's tone said he understood more than I'd said. Thanks for being straight with me. I hung up and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then Renee appeared in my doorway. Phil Garrett just pulled out of Danny's Riverside project, she said. I'm monitoring the industry message boards. That was fast. That's what happens when you build on a shaky foundation. She leaned against the doorframe. Also, and this is the part that gets interesting, I found something else in Danny's paperwork. The LLC has 2 names on the mortgage application. Danny's and a woman named Carol Finch. Carol Finch. I turned the name over. His ex, from about 3 years ago. They dated for almost 2 years. Renee raised an eyebrow. Did she know he was using her name on a mortgage application? I genuinely have no idea. Well, Renee said, someone who cared about Carol Finch's financial interests might want to make sure she was aware that her name was attached to a property with some significant legal complications. I barely know Carol Finch, but I know her sister, Renee said pleasantly. We're in the same book club. The real kind, where we actually read the books. She left before I could respond. I turned back to my computer feeling something I hadn't felt in 2 weeks. Not exactly happy, but something adjacent to it. Like a machine that's been running rough, finally finding its proper rhythm. Patty came home that evening looking like she'd been through something. She dropped her bag by the door, which she never did. She was usually meticulous about putting things away, and stood in the kitchen watching me make dinner with an expression I couldn't quite read. Danny lost the Garrison deal today, she said. I stirred the pot without turning around. What happened? His client pulled out. Something about legal concerns with his property investments. She paused. His other big deal, the Peterson Group thing he's been working on for months. They've apparently put everything on hold pending a background review. That's rough, I said. Kurt. I turned around. She was looking at me with that expression again, the one where suspicion and hope were fighting for the same real estate on her face. Is there anything you want to tell me? About Danny's business deals? About anything? I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd been married to for 11 years, who I'd trusted completely, without reservation, the way you trust the people you've built a life with, who'd apparently decided that what we had wasn't enough, and instead of saying so, had quietly burned it down from the inside. I think we both know what I know, I said. The question is, what we're going to do about it. She sat down at the kitchen table. I want to explain. Okay. It wasn't... She stopped. Started again. It wasn't that I didn't love you. It wasn't that simple. When did it start? A long pause. About 8 months ago. 8 months. I'd been cooking dinner for a woman who'd been lying to my face for 8 months. I'd been asking about her day and actually listening to the answer and thinking we were fine. Just going through a quiet patch, just two people who'd been married long enough that the excitement had settled into something steadier. Why Danny? I asked. Not angry, genuinely curious. Out of everyone in the world. He was just... She pressed her hands flat on the table. He was there. He paid attention. I know that sounds terrible. It does, I agreed. I'm not trying to justify it. Good, because there isn't a justification. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet. What are you going to do? I'm going to finish making dinner, I said. And then tomorrow I'm going to call a lawyer. And then we're going to figure out how to end this marriage with as little additional damage as possible. Because there's been enough damage already. She flinched like I'd said something cruel. But I hadn't. I'd said something true, which sometimes lands the same way. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, I said, it doesn't. I put a bowl of pasta in front of her. She didn't eat much. I cleaned the kitchen, took Biscuit for a walk, and went to bed at 9 o'clock. Slept like a stone. The next 2 weeks moved fast. Patty's company started asking questions. Renee had discovered in the course of her research that Danny had been listed as a consultant on several marketing materials Patty's firm had produced, which wouldn't have been a problem except he'd apparently had access to client strategy documents he wasn't authorized to see. Someone filed an anonymous tip with their HR department about a potential confidentiality breach. Patty was put on administrative leave pending investigation. Danny lost the Peterson Group deal. They issued a quiet statement about incompatible professional standards and moved on. 3 other clients followed. Carol Finch, once she learned her name was on a mortgage application she'd never signed, retained a lawyer. The State Revenue Department opened a formal inquiry into the LLC. It was, from a systems perspective, a remarkably clean cascade. One properly placed piece of information, finding its way to the right set of eyes, and the whole structure that had been built on shortcuts and assumptions came apart at the joints. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday. My lawyer, a woman named Greta Hollis, who had the energy of someone who'd heard every version of the story and remained unimpressed by all of them, told me the paperwork was straightforward, given that we didn't have children and our finances were relatively uncomplicated. How are you holding up? She asked. In that professional way, that means she's asking as a courtesy, rather than expecting a complicated answer. Better than I expected, I said honestly. She nodded. They usually do, when they're the one who didn't do anything wrong. Patty came home on a Thursday evening while I was watching the game and sat down across from me with the expression of someone who'd rehearsed a speech and wasn't sure it was going to land. HR is terminating my employment, she said. Effective immediately. Breach of confidentiality agreements. I muted the TV. I'm sorry. Are you? I'm sorry you're in this situation, I said. I'm not sorry about what caused it. She was quiet for a moment. Danny's losing the cabin. Can't make the mortgage without his income, and no bank will touch him while the investigation is open. She looked at her hands. We're not, she stopped. He blames me. Says I was careless with the documents, that I created the exposure. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say. Is this what you wanted? She asked. Both of us losing everything? I didn't want any of this, Patty. I wanted a marriage where my wife wasn't sleeping with my best friend. That's what I wanted. This is what I got instead. She nodded slowly, stood up, started toward the stairs, then stopped with her hand on the banister. I heard something from my friend Denise, she said, not turning around. She went through a divorce last year. Really hard one. She said she tried one of those values-based matching apps afterward. Singletune.com. Said it was different from other apps because you answer all these questions about what you actually believe in, what you've been through before you ever see anyone's profile. No swiping based on photos, just who you actually are. She paused. She said it helped her remember that she was still a person worth knowing. I didn't respond. She went upstairs. I sat there for a while after she left, the TV still muted, Biscuit asleep against my leg. The house felt very quiet. Not empty exactly, but cleared out. Like a room after the furniture's been moved and you can finally see the actual dimensions of the space. A person worth knowing. I thought about that. I called my lawyer the next morning and confirmed we were moving forward. She said the paperwork would be ready within the week. I thanked her, hung up, and sat at my kitchen table with my coffee in the early morning quiet, listening to Biscuit breathe. I thought about Singletune.com, about the idea of answering questions about what you believe in before anyone gets to see your face, about being matched on the basis of who you actually are, rather than what you look like in good lighting. I wasn't ready for any of that yet, but I thought about it, and it didn't feel as foreign as I would have expected. The divorce was final 7 weeks later. On the day I got the paperwork, I did something I'd been putting off for a while. I drove to the animal shelter on Route 40 and walked through the cat wing, which I hadn't planned to do. I'd come for a dog, actually, a companion for Biscuit. But I ended up stopping in front of a cage that held a 4-year-old tabby named, according to his card, Professor. The card said he was selective with his affections and requires a patient owner who won't take it personally. He was sitting in the back corner of his cage, staring at me with absolute contempt. I liked him immediately. I'll take Professor, I told the volunteer. He might not warm up to you for a while, she said carefully. That's fine, I said. I'm patient. Professor turned out to be exactly as advertised. Deeply judgmental, selectively affectionate, and oddly comforting in a way I couldn't quite explain. He and Biscuit reached a diplomatic understanding within about a week. I'd come home from work to find them on opposite ends of the couch, maintaining a respectful distance that somehow communicated mutual acceptance. I started cooking real food, not for anyone else, just for myself, which turned out to be its own kind of satisfaction. I tried recipes I'd been meaning to make for years. I ate at the kitchen table instead of in front of the TV. I called my brother Pete, who lived in Dayton, more than I had in the previous 3 years combined. He came over for a weekend in November, and we watched football and ate chili and talked the way we used to before life got busy and complicated and full of things we didn't say. You seem better, Pete said on Sunday morning over coffee. I am better. Not just better than before, better than I've seen you in a long time. He looked at me steadily. Were you unhappy for a while there? I thought about it honestly. I think I was, yeah. I just didn't have the language for it because I thought unhappy was what you pushed through, not something you addressed. Pete nodded. Yeah, I get that. We sat with that for a minute. My buddy Walt went through something similar a couple years back, Pete said. Wife left, blindsided him completely. He was a wreck for about 6 months, and then he found this app, singletune.com, I think it was called. Some kind of a matching thing, but different. You take this whole assessment first. Questions about your values, what you've been through, what you're actually looking for. No photos until you've matched on the real stuff. Pete shrugged. He said it was the first time he felt like someone was interested in who he actually was, not just whether he looked okay in a profile picture. He's been with someone for about a year now. Seems genuinely happy. Good for Walt, I said, and I meant it. Just saying it exists, Pete said. When you're ready, no rush. I'm not ready yet. I know, but you will be. He left Sunday afternoon, and I stood in the driveway watching his truck disappear down the road, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happy exactly, but open. Like a window that had been painted shut for years, finally worked loose. Renee and I had been talking for months about starting something on the side. She had the legal and contract expertise. I had the logistics background and the industry connections. We'd identified a gap in the regional market for a consulting service that helped small distribution companies build better compliance infrastructure, essentially doing for other businesses what I'd spent 20 years doing for mine, but on a contract basis. We signed the partnership paperwork in December, rented a small office space above a hardware store on Clement Street. Nothing fancy. 2 desks, a conference table, a coffee maker that Renee had very strong opinions about. We called the company Clear Path Consulting, which was her idea, and which I liked because it meant exactly what it said. Our first client was a small family-owned distribution company in Findlay that had been operating for 30 years on handshakes and good intentions, and was starting to realize that wasn't going to be sufficient as they tried to scale. We spent 3 months helping them build systems that would actually hold up. The owner, a 60-year-old man named Gerald, who wore the same barn jacket every day and made excellent coffee, shook my hand at the end of our engagement and said, I feel like I can actually grow now, like I've got a real foundation. That felt like something. I ran into Danny in January at a gas station off the highway. He was driving a different car than the last time I'd seen him. Older, smaller. He saw me at the same moment I saw him, and we both had about 2 seconds to decide how to handle it. He walked over. I stayed by my car. Kurt, he said. Danny. He looked rough. Not catastrophically rough, but the way people look when things have been hard for a while and they've stopped pretending otherwise. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me, he said. I know that's not. He stopped, started again. I just wanted to say I know what I did, and I know what it cost you, and I'm sorry. I looked at him for a moment. This man I'd known for 30 years, who'd been my best man, who'd helped me move into 3 different apartments and 2 houses, who'd been there for things that mattered. My dad's funeral, the year I got laid off and thought my career was over, the night Patty and I had the worst fight of our early marriage, and I'd called him at midnight, and he'd come over and sat with me until things felt manageable, who'd also answered my wife's phone at 1:00 in the morning and said she was busy. I hear you, I said. Not, it's okay. Not, I forgive you. Just, I hear you. Because I did. He nodded, seemed to understand the distinction. Take care of yourself, he said. You too. He got in his car and drove away. I pumped my gas and drove to the office. It was a Tuesday in March when my phone buzzed with a notification from an app I'd downloaded about 3 weeks earlier and hadn't done much with yet. I'd completed the assessment. It had taken about 45 minutes and asked questions I hadn't expected. Things about what I'd learned from my hardest experiences, what I believed about trust, what I thought made a life actually worth living. Not the kind of questions you answer quickly or dishonestly, because there's no point. Singletune.com was built for people who'd been through something real, and the questions reflected that. They felt like they'd been written by someone who understood that the most important things about a person aren't visible in a photograph. The notification said I had a match. Her name was Diane. Her profile said she was 51, a high school history teacher in Westerville, divorced 3 years ago, 2 kids in college. Her assessment answers, which the app shared in summary form, talked about learning to trust her own judgment again, about what it meant to choose honesty over comfort, about the specific kind of loneliness that comes from being in a relationship where you've stopped being fully known. I read that last part twice. I sent her a message. Nothing clever, just your answer about being fully known. I think I understand that better than I would have a year ago. She wrote back within the hour. That's either the most honest opener I've gotten on here or the most calculated. I'm hoping it's the first one. Honest, I wrote back. I'm not good enough at calculated. Good, she said. Calculated is exhausting. We talked for 3 hours that night. Not about our exes, not about what went wrong, but about what we actually thought about things, about what made work feel meaningful, about the specific pleasure of cooking a meal that turned out right, about what we'd each learned about ourselves in the last few years that we hadn't known before. At some point, I looked up and it was past midnight, and I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and Professor asleep on the chair across from me, and I was smiling. Not performing okay, not managing. Actually smiling. I took Diane to dinner on a Saturday in April at a place in German Village that had been open since 1987 and still made their pasta by hand. We talked for 4 hours. She was funnier than I'd expected and sharper than I was ready for. And she had this quality of saying exactly what she meant without being unkind about it that I found genuinely remarkable. Walking back to our cars, she said, I was nervous about tonight. Me too, I said. You didn't seem nervous. I was quiet. I'm always quiet when I'm nervous. People mistake it for confidence. She laughed, the real kind, not the social kind, and said, I'll remember that. Spring came in like it always does in Ohio, which is to say reluctantly and then all at once. The trees went from bare to full in what felt like a week. The office on Clement Street got afternoon light that made the whole space look better than it deserved to. Biscuit started spending more time in the backyard, supervising the return of birds to the neighborhood, with the focused attention of a retired security guard who still took the job seriously. I was at the coffee shop on Fifth one morning, waiting for a meeting with a potential client, when I saw Patty. She was sitting alone at a corner table, both hands wrapped around a mug, staring at nothing in particular. She'd lost some of the polish she used to maintain. Simpler clothes, hair pulled back, no visible performance of having everything together. She looked tired in a way that had settled in and made itself at home. She looked up and saw me at the same moment. I watched the calculation happen on her face. What to do with this? How to play it? Whether to acknowledge it or look away. She stood up slowly and walked over. Hey, she said. Hey. A pause. You look good. Thanks. She seemed to want to say more. I could see it. The apology that had probably been sitting in her chest for months. The explanation that would never quite be sufficient. The question of whether I'd ever really understand what had happened and why. All of it right there, just below the surface. I didn't wait for it. Take care of yourself, Patty, I said. And I meant it the way you mean it when you're done carrying something. Not cruel, not warm, just honest. The clean kind of done. I picked up my coffee from the counter and walked out into the April morning. The light was that particular spring quality that makes everything look slightly more possible than it did the day before. I stood on the sidewalk for a second, just breathing. Somewhere down the block, someone was mowing a lawn. A kid on a bike went past. A dog barked twice and stopped. Some storms don't come to break you. They come to clear the air so you can finally see what was there the whole time. What's worth keeping, what you'd been holding on to out of habit, and what was never really yours to carry in the first place. I walked to my car, called Diane on the way. She answered on the second ring. Hey, she said. How's your morning? Better now, I said. And that was the truth.